A soldier's dog showed up at his wedding. What the dog did next left the bride in tears. In the days following the wedding, Jake and Emily settled into their new life as husband and wife, with Max by their side. But even as they basked in the glow of marital bliss, questions about Max's disappearance and miraculous return lingered in the back of their minds. Jake, in particular, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than met the eye. He had been told that Max was lost during a mission, that despite their best efforts, they couldn't find him in the chaos of battle. But now, seeing the scars and bruises that marred Max's body, Jake began to suspect that something far more sinister had occurred. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, watching Max doze contentedly at their feet, Jake turned to Emily with a troubled expression. "I can't stop thinking about what happened to Max," he said quietly. "The way he looked when he showed up at the wedding, it's like he'd been through hell and back." Emily reached out and took Jake's hand, her thumb rubbing soothing circles on his skin. "I know," she said softly. "It's been on my mind too. Have you considered reaching out to your old unit? Maybe they have some answers." Jake hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "I don't know, Em. I trust those guys with my life, but what if they're not telling me everything? What if there's something they're trying to hide?" Emily's brow furrowed, remembering the conversation she'd had with her father on their wedding day. She had pushed it to the back of her mind, not wanting to burden Jake with more worries, but now she realized that keeping it from him would only create a wedge between them. "Jake," she said slowly, "there's something I need to tell you. On our wedding day, my dad came to see me. He said he'd received some disturbing information about your last deployment, about what really happened to Max." Jake's eyes widened, his grip on Emily's hand tightening. "What? What did he say?" Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. "He didn't have all the details, but he said he had a feeling something sinister was at play. That Max's disappearance wasn't just a tragic accident." Jake's mind raced, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed suddenly falling into place. The strange looks he'd caught between his commanding officers, the evasive answers to his questions, the abrupt way he'd been shipped home after Max went missing. "I think you're right," he said finally, his voice low and determined. "I think it's time I start digging for the truth. I owe it to Max, and to myself." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with pride and love for the man beside her. "I'm with you every step of the way," she promised. "We'll get to the bottom of this, together." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jake and Emily sat in silence, their hands clasped tightly, their hearts united in a common purpose. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the truth might be painful to uncover. But they also knew that they had each other, and the unwavering loyalty of the dog who had defied all odds to find his way back home. Jake's search for answers led him to reconnect with his former comrades, men and women who had fought by his side and shared in the bond that only soldiers could understand. He reached out to them one by one, asking if they remembered anything unusual about Max's disappearance, if they had heard any whispers or rumors in the aftermath. At first, his inquiries were met with hesitation and vague responses. Many of his fellow veterans seemed reluctant to speak about the incident, as if they were afraid of stirring up painful memories or crossing some unspoken line. But as Jake persisted, a few began to open up, sharing bits and pieces of information that slowly began to form a disturbing picture. "I always thought it was strange," one of his buddies, a former medic named Danny, confided over the phone. "The way they just wrote Max off, like he was just another piece of equipment that could be replaced. It didn't sit right with me." Another, a sharpshooter named Lisa, recalled overhearing a conversation between two officers shortly after Max went missing. "They were talking about some kind of deal," she said hesitantly. "Something about a buyer who was interested in military dogs. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, I don't know, Jake. It sounds like they might have been up to something shady." With each new piece of information, Jake's suspicions grew. He began to suspect that Max's disappearance was no accident, but rather the result of a deliberate act. Someone had targeted Max, had taken him for their own purposes. But who? And why? As he dug deeper, a name began to surface: Colonel Grant Mercer. A high-ranking military contractor with a reputation for ruthlessness and a history of questionable dealings. Several of Jake's sources mentioned Mercer in passing, hinting at his involvement in Max's disappearance. "I heard he had a side business," one of Jake's former squadmates, a burly man named Tony, said grimly. "Selling military dogs to the highest bidder. Apparently, there's a big market for them in certain circles. Private security, illegal fighting rings, that sort of thing." Jake's blood ran cold at the thought of Max being sold like a commodity, subjected to who knows what kind of cruelty and abuse. He knew he had to confront Mercer, to demand answers and bring him to justice. But he also knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, needed the support of those who understood what he was up against. And so, with Emily by his side, he began to reach out to his network of veterans, rallying them to his cause. They came from all walks of life, from all corners of the country. Men and women who had served with honor and distinction, who had faced the horrors of war and emerged stronger for it. They came because they believed in Jake, because they knew that what had happened to Max was a betrayal of everything they had fought for. Together, they began to plan their next move, to gather evidence and build a case against Mercer and his cronies. They knew it wouldn't be easy, that they would face resistance and intimidation at every turn. But they also knew that they had each other, and the unbreakable bond of loyalty and brotherhood that had been forged in the heat of battle. As they worked, Max remained a constant presence, a living reminder of what they were fighting for. His scars had begun to heal, his spirit unbroken despite all he had endured. And as Jake looked into his eyes, he saw a reflection of his own determination, his own unwavering commitment to justice. They would not rest until the truth was brought to light, until those responsible were held accountable for their crimes. They would fight, as they had always fought, for what was right. For Max, and for all the brave dogs who had served alongside them, loyal to the end. As Jake and his team of veterans delved deeper into the mystery surrounding Max's disappearance, they uncovered a web of corruption that extended far beyond Colonel Grant Mercer. They discovered that Mercer was just one player in a larger network of military contractors and black market dealers who trafficked in stolen dogs, selling them to the highest bidder without regard for their welfare or the bonds they had forged with their handlers. The more they learned, the more outraged they became. These were not just animals, but loyal companions who had served their country with bravery and distinction. They deserved better than to be treated as mere commodities, to be bought and sold like objects. But even as they gathered evidence and built their case, Jake and his team faced resistance at every turn. Mercer, it seemed, had powerful friends in high places, people who were willing to go to great lengths to protect him and his illicit business. They received threatening phone calls in the middle of the night, warning them to back off or face the consequences. They were followed by mysterious figures in dark suits, their every move watched and recorded. And when they tried to bring their evidence to the authorities, they were met with a wall of bureaucratic red tape and stonewalling. But Jake and his team refused to be intimidated. They knew that they were fighting for something larger than themselves, for the principles of honor and loyalty that had guided them through the darkest days of their service. And so they pressed on, drawing strength from each other and from the unwavering support of their loved ones. Emily stood by Jake's side through it all, her love and devotion a constant source of comfort and inspiration. And Max, ever faithful, remained a symbol of the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. As they dug deeper, they began to uncover a pattern of abuse and neglect that extended far beyond Max's case. They heard stories of other dogs who had been stolen and sold, who had been subjected to unimaginable cruelty and suffering at the hands of their new owners. There was Rocky, a German shepherd who had been trained as a bomb-sniffing dog, only to be sold to a private security firm and forced to work long hours in dangerous conditions without proper care or rest. And Luna, a gentle Labrador who had been stolen from her handler and sold to a dog-fighting ring, where she had been forced to fight for her life against other desperate, terrified animals. Each story was a heartbreaking reminder of the stakes they were fighting for, of the lives that hung in the balance. And with each passing day, Jake and his team grew more determined to bring Mercer and his associates to justice, to shine a light on the dark underbelly of the military contracting world. They knew that they were up against powerful forces, that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But they also knew that they had truth on their side, and the unwavering support of a community that believed in the values of loyalty, honor, and justice. And so they soldiered on, united in their purpose and their resolve. They would not rest until every stolen dog was returned to its rightful owner, until every abuser was brought to account for their crimes. They would fight, as they had always fought, for what was right. For Max, for Rocky and Luna, and for all the brave dogs who had served by their sides, loyal to the end. As the evidence against Colonel Grant Mercer and his associates mounted, Jake and his team knew they were getting close to the truth. But they also knew that the closer they got, the more dangerous their mission became. They began to receive anonymous threats, warning them to back off or face dire consequences. At first, they tried to brush them off as empty intimidation tactics, but when Jake's car was vandalized and Emily started receiving threatening phone calls at work, they realized they couldn't take any chances. They started taking precautions, varying their routines and watching their backs at all times. They met in secret, using encrypted messaging apps and burner phones to communicate. And they started carrying weapons, just in case. But even as they took steps to protect themselves, they refused to let fear stop them from pursuing justice. They knew that they had a responsibility to Max and to all the other dogs who had been victimized by Mercer's cruel scheme. And so they pressed on, gathering more evidence and building their case. They tracked down former employees of Mercer's company, people who had witnessed firsthand the abuse and neglect that went on behind closed doors. They combed through financial records and shipping manifests, piecing together the web of transactions that connected Mercer to the black market dog trade. And as they dug deeper, they started to uncover even more disturbing details. They learned that Mercer wasn't just selling dogs to the highest bidder, but was also using them for his own twisted purposes. They heard stories of dogs being subjected to cruel experiments, used as test subjects for new drugs and weapons. The more they learned, the more horrified they became. This wasn't just about money or greed, but about a fundamental lack of regard for the lives and welfare of innocent animals. It was a betrayal of everything they had fought for, of the values they held dear. But even as they reeled from the magnitude of Mercer's crimes, they knew they couldn't let it stop them. They had to keep going, had to see this through to the end. And so they redoubled their efforts, working around the clock to build an airtight case against Mercer and his cohorts. They reached out to journalists and lawmakers, anyone who would listen and help them bring attention to this issue. And slowly but surely, their hard work started to pay off. More and more people began to take notice, to ask questions and demand answers. The media picked up on the story, running exposés on the dark underbelly of the military contracting world. And lawmakers started to take action, calling for investigations and hearings into Mercer's activities. Through it all, Jake and his team remained focused on their mission. They knew that they were fighting an uphill battle, that the odds were stacked against them. But they also knew that they had each other, and the unwavering support of a community that believed in the power of justice and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. And so they kept going, driven by a sense of purpose and a fierce determination to see this through to the end. They would not rest until every dog was safe, until every abuser was brought to justice. They would fight, as they had always fought, for what was right. As the pressure on Colonel Grant Mercer and his associates intensified, Jake and his team knew they were getting closer to the truth. But they also knew that the closer they got, the more desperate Mercer would become. They started to hear rumors of Mercer trying to cover his tracks, of documents being shredded and witnesses being intimidated. They knew they had to act fast, before all the evidence disappeared. And so they set in motion a plan to confront Mercer directly, to force him to answer for his crimes. They gathered all the evidence they had collected, all the testimonies and records and photographs, and they prepared to present it to the authorities. But they also knew that they couldn't rely on the system alone. They had seen too many cases of powerful men like Mercer slipping through the cracks, of justice being denied to those who needed it most. And so they decided to take matters into their own hands. They reached out to their network of veterans and supporters, rallying them to join in a public demonstration outside Mercer's corporate headquarters. On the day of the protest, hundreds of people showed up, waving signs and chanting slogans. They were a diverse group, made up of veterans and civilians, young and old, united in their demand for justice. Jake and his team led the charge, marching up to the front doors of the building and demanding to speak with Mercer. They were met with resistance at first, with security guards trying to turn them away. But they refused to back down, insisting that they wouldn't leave until Mercer answered for his crimes. And to their surprise, Mercer himself finally emerged, flanked by his lawyers and his private security detail. He looked haggard and defensive, his eyes darting nervously as he surveyed the crowd. Jake stepped forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Colonel Mercer," he said, "we have evidence that you and your associates have been involved in the illegal trafficking of military dogs. We demand that you answer for your crimes and make reparations to the animals and the handlers you have harmed." Mercer's face twisted into a sneer. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he spat. "I am a respected businessman and a patriot. I have done nothing wrong." But Jake was undeterred. He held up a folder, thick with documents and photographs. "We have proof," he said. "Testimony from your former employees. Financial records showing your involvement in the black market dog trade. And most damning of all, the scars and wounds on the dogs themselves, evidence of the abuse and neglect they suffered at your hands." Mercer's facade began to crack. He looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The crowd had surrounded him, their anger and determination palpable. And then, to everyone's shock, one of Mercer's own security guards stepped forward. "He's telling the truth," the guard said, his voice shaking. "I've seen it myself. The way they treat those dogs, it's not right. I can't be a part of it anymore." The guard's confession was like a spark to a powder keg. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their voices rising in a deafening crescendo. Mercer's lawyers tried to hustle him away, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. In the days and weeks that followed, the dominoes began to fall. More of Mercer's employees came forward, offering their own testimony and evidence. The authorities launched a full-scale investigation, raiding Mercer's offices and seizing his assets. And through it all, Jake and his team remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice. They knew that this was just the beginning, that there was still much work to be done. But they also knew that they had struck a powerful blow against the forces of greed and cruelty, and that they had given hope to countless animals and their handlers. They had proven that the bond between a soldier and his dog was unbreakable, that it could overcome even the darkest of circumstances. And they have shown the world that when people of conscience stand together, there is no limit to what they can achieve. In the aftermath of Colonel Grant Mercer's exposure and downfall, Jake and his team found themselves at the center of a media firestorm. They were hailed as heroes by some, and vilified as troublemakers by others. But through it all, they remained focused on their mission, to bring justice to the dogs and handlers who had been harmed by Mercer's cruel scheme. They worked tirelessly to track down every dog that had been stolen and sold, using their network of contacts and their own investigative skills. They raided puppy mills and dog fighting rings, rescuing countless animals from lives of abuse and neglect. And they didn't stop there. They also fought to change the laws and regulations surrounding the use of military dogs, pushing for greater oversight and accountability in the contracting process. They testified before Congress and met with lawmakers, arguing passionately for the need to protect these brave and loyal animals. Through it all, Jake and Emily's bond only grew stronger. They leaned on each other for support and encouragement, drawing strength from their shared commitment to the cause. And Max, ever faithful, remained by their side, a living reminder of the unbreakable connection between a soldier and his dog. But even as they celebrated their victories and mourned their losses, Jake and his team knew that their work was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war against animal cruelty and exploitation was far from won. They knew that there were still countless dogs out there who needed their help, still countless handlers who were struggling to cope with the loss of their beloved companions. And they knew that they couldn't rest until every last one of them was safe and sound. And so they pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that was stronger than ever. They recruited new members to their cause, building a vast network of volunteers and supporters who shared their passion and their commitment. They organized rallies and fundraisers, using their newfound celebrity to raise awareness and generate support for their mission. They worked with shelters and rescue organizations to find forever homes for the dogs they had saved, and to provide training and support for their new owners. And through it all, they never lost sight of what had brought them together in the first place, their love for Max, and for all the brave and loyal dogs who had served by their sides. They knew that they owed it to them to keep fighting, to never give up until every last dog was safe and every last abuser was brought to justice. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and challenges, moments of doubt and frustration. But Jake and his team never wavered in their resolve. They knew that they were part of something bigger than themselves, something that transcended their individual struggles and sacrifices. And as they looked to the future, they knew that they would never stop fighting for what was right. They would never stop working to build a world where every dog was treated with the love and respect they deserved, where every soldier and every handler could count on the unbreakable bond that had sustained them through the darkest of times. They were more than just a team, more than just a group of like-minded individuals. They were a family, bound together by a shared purpose and an unshakable commitment to justice. And together, they knew that they could face anything that life threw their way. For Max, and for all the brave and loyal dogs who had served by their sides, they would keep fighting, keep pushing, keep believing in the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. They were soldiers, after all, and they knew that surrender was not an option. As the dust settled in the wake of Colonel Grant Mercer's downfall, Jake and his team found themselves at a crossroads. They had achieved a major victory in their fight against animal cruelty and exploitation, but they knew that their work was far from over. They had rescued countless dogs from lives of abuse and neglect, and had helped to bring their abusers to justice. But they also knew that there were still so many more animals out there who needed their help, so many more battles to be fought. And so, with heavy hearts and renewed determination, they began to chart a course for the future. They knew that they couldn't do it alone, that they would need the support and cooperation of law enforcement, lawmakers, and the wider public. They reached out to their allies in government and the media, urging them to take up the cause of animal welfare and to push for stronger laws and penalties for those who would abuse and exploit these innocent creatures. They met with leaders in the military and the private sector, lobbying for greater transparency and accountability in the use of working dogs. And they continued to work tirelessly on the ground, rescuing dogs from puppy mills and fighting rings, providing them with the medical care and rehabilitation they so desperately needed. They built a network of foster families and adopters, ensuring that every dog they saved had a loving forever home to call their own. Through it all, Jake and Emily remained the heart and soul of the operation, their love for each other and for Max driving them forward even in the darkest of times. They leaned on each other for support and comfort, finding strength in their shared commitment to the cause. And Max, ever the loyal companion, remained by their side through it all. His scars had healed, but the memories of his ordeal would never fade. He had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a living reminder of the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. As the months turned into years, Jake and his team began to see the fruits of their labors. Laws were passed and enforced, cracking down on animal abusers and traffickers. Military contractors were held to higher standards of accountability, and working dogs were given greater protections under the law. But even as they celebrated these victories, they knew that their work was never truly done. There would always be those who sought to profit from the suffering of animals, always be those who saw them as nothing more than property to be bought and sold. And so they pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that was stronger than ever. They knew that they were part of something bigger than themselves, something that transcended their individual struggles and sacrifices. They were more than just a team, more than just a group of like-minded individuals. They were a family, bound together by a shared love for the animals they had sworn to protect. And together, they knew that they could face anything that life threw their way. For Max, and for all the brave and loyal dogs who had served by their sides, they would keep fighting, keep pushing, keep believing in the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. They were warriors, after all, and they knew that surrender was not an option. As Jake looked out over the horizon, he knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he also knew that he had everything he needed to keep going: the love of his wife, the loyalty of his dog, and the support of his fellow soldiers in arms. And so, with a smile on his face and a fire in his heart, he turned to Emily and Max and said, "Let's get to work. We've got a lot of dogs to save." Years had passed since Jake and his team had first taken up the fight against animal cruelty and exploitation, and in that time, they had achieved more than they ever could have imagined. They had rescued countless dogs from lives of abuse and neglect, had helped to bring their abusers to justice, and had pushed for stronger laws and greater accountability in the use of working animals. But even as they celebrated their victories and mourned their losses, they knew that their work was far from over. There were still so many dogs out there who needed their help, still so many battles to be fought. And so they pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that was stronger than ever. They expanded their network of volunteers and supporters, reaching out to communities across the country and around the world. They partnered with local law enforcement and animal welfare organizations, working together to identify and shut down illegal breeding operations and fighting rings. They also continued to push for change at the highest levels of government and industry, lobbying for stricter regulations and harsher penalties for those who would abuse and exploit animals for profit. They testified before Congress and met with leaders in the military and private sector, urging them to prioritize the welfare of working dogs and other animals in their care. Through it all, Jake and Emily remained the heart and soul of the operation, their love for each other and for Max driving them forward even in the darkest of times. They had faced so many challenges and obstacles over the years, and had seen so much suffering and cruelty. But they had also seen so much hope and resilience, so much love and compassion. And Max, ever the loyal companion, remained by their side through it all. He was growing older now, his muzzle flecked with gray and his steps a little slower than they used to be. But his spirit was as strong as ever, his love for Jake and Emily undiminished by the passage of time. As they looked to the future, Jake and his team knew that there was still so much work to be done. But they also knew that they had the strength and the determination to keep fighting, to keep pushing for a world where every dog was treated with the love and respect they deserved. They had built a movement that was bigger than any one person or any one team, a movement that transcended borders and boundaries. They had inspired countless others to take up the cause of animal welfare, to stand up against cruelty and exploitation wherever they found it. And as they looked out over the horizon, they knew that they were not alone. They were part of a global community of activists and advocates, of soldiers and civilians, all working together towards a common goal. They were united in their love for the animals they had sworn to protect, and their commitment to justice and compassion. For Max, and for all the brave and loyal dogs who had served by their sides, they would keep fighting, keep pushing, keep believing in the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. They were warriors, after all, and they knew that surrender was not an option. And so, with a fire in their hearts and a song in their souls, they marched forward into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were the guardians of the voiceless, the protectors of the innocent. And they would never, ever give up. As the years went by, Jake and Emily's family grew and changed, but their commitment to the cause of animal welfare remained as strong as ever. They welcomed 2 children into the world, a boy and a girl who grew up surrounded by the love of their parents and the loyalty of their 4-legged companions. Max remained a constant presence in their lives, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. Even as he grew older and his body began to fail him, his spirit never wavered. He was always there when Jake needed him, always ready to offer a comforting nuzzle or a playful bark. But as Max entered his final years, Jake and Emily knew that they would soon have to say goodbye to their beloved friend. It was a prospect that filled them both with dread, but they also knew that they had been blessed to have had Max in their lives for as long as they did. And so, when the time finally came, they gathered their children and their closest friends and family members, and they held a ceremony in Max's honor. They shared stories of his bravery and his loyalty, of the countless lives he had touched and the countless hearts he had won. They laid him to rest in a quiet spot on their property, beneath a towering oak tree that had always been his favorite place to rest. And as they said their final goodbyes, they knew that Max would always be with them, watching over them from beyond the veil. In the years that followed, Jake and his team continued their work, driven by the memory of Max and all the other dogs they had loved and lost. They expanded their efforts to include other animals as well, fighting against the cruelty and exploitation of horses, cats, and wildlife. They built a network of sanctuaries and rehabilitation centers, places where abused and neglected animals could find safety and healing. They worked with lawmakers and law enforcement to strengthen animal protection laws and increase penalties for those who violated them. And through it all, they never lost sight of the power of the human-animal bond, the incredible capacity for love and devotion that existed between people and their furry companions. They saw it in the wagging tails and the grateful eyes of the dogs they rescued, and the tears of joy and relief shed by their adopters. They saw it in their own children, who grew up surrounded by animals and learned from an early age the importance of compassion and responsibility. They saw it in the countless volunteers and supporters who joined their cause, united by a shared love for the creatures who shared their world. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their work would never be done. There would always be animals in need, always cruelty and suffering to be fought. But they also knew that they had the strength and the determination to keep going, to keep making a difference in the lives of the voiceless and the vulnerable. They were more than just a team, more than just a family. They were a force for good in the world, a beacon of hope and compassion in a time of darkness and despair. And they knew that as long as there were animals in need, they would never stop fighting for them. For Max, and for all the brave and loyal creatures who had touched their lives, they would keep marching forward, keep pushing for a better world. They were the guardians of the innocent, the champions of the voiceless. And they would never, ever give up. As Jake and Emily stood hand in hand at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Max Reynolds Animal Sanctuary, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and gratitude for all that they had accomplished. The sanctuary, named in honor of their beloved Max, would be a place of healing and hope for countless animals in need, a testament to the power of the human-animal bond. They had come so far since those early days, when they had first taken up the fight against animal cruelty and exploitation. They had faced so many challenges and setbacks, had seen so much suffering and despair. But they had also seen so much love and compassion, so much resilience and hope. And now, as they looked out over the crowd of supporters and well-wishers, they knew that they had truly made a difference in the world. They had touched countless lives, both human and animal, and had inspired a new generation of activists and advocates. Their children, now grown and with families of their own, stood beside them, beaming with pride and joy. They had grown up surrounded by the love of animals, and had learned from an early age the importance of compassion and responsibility. And now, they were carrying on their parents' legacy, fighting for the rights and welfare of creatures great and small. As Jake stepped up to the podium to address the crowd, he felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of Max, of the incredible journey they had shared together. He thought of all the brave and loyal dogs who had served by his side, who had given their lives in the line of duty. And he thought of the countless animals who still needed their help, who were still suffering in silence and darkness. But he also knew that there was hope, that there were people like him and Emily and their team who would never stop fighting for them. Today, we honor the memory of Max, and all the brave and loyal animals who have touched our lives, he began, his voice steady and strong. But we also look to the future, to the work that still needs to be done. We know that the fight against animal cruelty and exploitation is far from over, that there are still so many battles to be fought. But we also know that we are not alone, that there are countless others who share our passion and our commitment. We are part of a global movement for change, a movement that transcends borders and boundaries. And together, we will keep pushing for a world where every animal is treated with the love and respect they deserve. As he spoke, Jake felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that there would be challenges ahead, that there would be setbacks and heartbreaks. But he also knew that he had the strength and the courage to face them, that he had the love and support of his family and his team. And he knew that somewhere, in a place beyond the veil, Max was watching over them, his tail wagging with pride and joy. He had been more than just a dog, more than just a loyal companion. He had been a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder of the incredible bond that could exist between humans and animals. And as Jake and Emily looked to the future, they knew that they would always carry Max's spirit with them, that they would always fight for the voiceless and the vulnerable. They were the guardians of the innocent, the champions of the just. And they would never, ever give up. For Max, and for all the brave and loyal creatures who had touched their lives, they would keep marching forward, keep pushing for a better world. They were the warriors of compassion, the soldiers of love. And together, they would build a future where every animal could live in peace and safety, where every heart could know the joy and comfort of a furry friend. It was a dream worth fighting for, a cause worth living for. And as they stood there, surrounded by the love and support of their community, Jake and Emily knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. They were the guardians of the voiceless, the protectors of the innocent. And they would never, ever stop fighting for what was right.